Welcome everyone to the Word on Fire show. So glad you could join us today. I'm your host, Joseph Glore, and with us, there's a man. And I'm talking about the Bishop here, the Bishop from Los Angeles. Sometimes there's a man, well, he's the man for his time and place. He fits right in there. And that's the Bishop from Los Angeles. Bishop?
Hey, Joe, that's from The Big Lebowski, huh?
Good guess. Very good. Yeah, very good. Very
Excellent. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. And we'll talk more about The Big Lebowski maybe later. But right now, I want to talk to you about this picture I saw on Facebook of you with another priest in front of a helicopter. Was it a rescue mission, like a spiritual rescue mission?
Yeah, no.
What was going on there?
It wasn't quite that dramatic. It's a really long, involved story, but the simple version is once a year on Santa Cruz Island, which is out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Santa Barbara, beautiful place, there's a mass. And to this mass comes Joe Walsh, who's the guitarist for the Eagles and great, rock star in his own right.
That's Hotel California, right?
Yeah. So when I met him, I shook his hand and said, well, it's a privilege to shake the hand that played the greatest solo in rock and roll history.
That's awesome.
So anyway, I said the mass out there. And also Drew Carey was there. You know Drew Carey, the guy from The Price is Right?
Yeah, of course.
He was there. And we have this mass. And then Joe Walsh plays during the liturgy. And the mass concludes with Joe strumming Amazing Grace. And he sings the song and then leads everybody out of the chapel. So it was quite an interesting afternoon.
You have the weirdest life. Well, today we're going to talk about, not about music or rock bands. We're going to talk about film. Today we're going to talk about the film contributions of two of the greatest filmmakers, I think, of our time, namely Joel and Ethan Coen, more famously known as the Coen brothers. They cast, direct, produce, edit, or write, or at least adapt the writing for all their films. They are motion picture artists, I think, in the truest sense. They've been nominated for 13 Academy Awards. They've won 4. They've garnered the praise of many of the world's most influential people, including Bishop Barron. You're noticeably one of their biggest fans. So tell me, what makes these guys so unique in the film world?
Well, what you said about their filmmaking prowess, I mean, that's evident in every frame that they film. I mean, they're really great storytellers and great filmmakers. In almost all their movies, there's something interesting in every scene. They remind me of Bob Dylan. Joan Baez many years ago said, even in Bob Dylan's most minor songs, there's always something interesting going on.
You know what's crazy is they're from Minnesota.
Yeah, they have a lot in
just
common.
like Bob Dylan. Yeah.
Jews from Minnesota, and there's a lot in that. And of course, they love Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan comes up in a lot of their movies, most famously The Big Lebowski. But their movies remind me of that statement of Joan Baez, that even in their minor movies or in scenes that you think are not that important, there's always something quirky, funny, interesting, watchable. I find if I'm going through the cable and I happen to run across a Coen Brothers movie, I don't care what it is, I'll watch it. There's just something watchable about them. So there's that. But what I like about them is they are the most spiritually alert filmmakers working today. Now, does that mean they've got a fully integrated Catholic vision of everything? Well, of course not. But they bring a deep spiritual awareness to their work. And they remind me vividly of Flannery O'Connor. I don't think anyone today is more like Flannery O'Connor in the artistic style than the Coen brothers. So I think anyone interested in religion can learn a lot from their movies.
Let's go through as many of their movies as we can, and I'll just declare a blanket spoiler alert for every single one of their movies. We're not going to beat too much on the plot, but we're going to kind of illuminate some of the spiritual themes in there, or you are, rather. I'll listen, and we'll get through as many as we can. Let's start with their biggest hit, Fargo. What's some of the spiritual themes? What's going on in this movie?
I love that movie. I remember, this goes way back, because now they're both gone, Siskel and Ebert, the film reviewers. Yeah. And they told a story that the two of them would watch a movie together in an empty theater, And they say when they were watching Fargo, Gene Siskel got up and he went over to Roger Ebert and he just said, "This is why we do what we do." They just knew right away that they watched 1,000 movies a year, but they knew this is why people make movies. And so everything we said about the Coen brothers' filmmaking prowess is on full display in that movie. Quirky, funny, intriguing, bizarre, all those great things. But I think it's also a film of enormous spiritual power. I'll say a couple things. We find in that movie, as we find in most of their movies and in most serious religious artists, a keen sense of the fallenness of the world. You know what I'm saying? See, there's a weird prejudice out there that religious people have this Pollyannish view of the world. I would say really au contraire. I mean, my experience, this is from Dante on.
Right.
Religious people have a very keen sense of the fallenness of the world. And I would say it comes from a deeply biblical doctrine. We'd call it original sin, but a sense of the fall. There's something really irreducibly the matter with us. So you see in Fargo, of course, in the main character played by William H. Macy, this poor man we never quite understand what originally motivates him to seek the money that he needs.
Right.
But it leads him down this horrific path that, bodies piling up and disaster upon disaster, but he just keeps getting deeper and deeper. And then, of course, the two people he's dealing with, these, kidnappers, turn out to be, off the chart, one of them especially, off the charts. Murderers. And so the Coen brothers look unblinkingly at the dysfunction of the world. And I think that makes them very biblical. See, both in ancient philosophy and modern philosophy, you've got programs of perfectibility that say something like, if we just get this straightened out, we'll be okay. So whether it's Plato saying you just escape from the cave and understand the forms, you'll get your life together. Aristotle saying habituate yourself to the good and you'll be good. Modern forms of it, from Rousseau and Kant and Marx on, just make the right moral or political reforms, or then post-Freud, do the right psychological counseling, you'll be okay. See, religious people always say, no, no, no. There's something that's so fundamentally wrong with us that no amount of political or economic or psychological reform is going to solve the problem. See? Now, you say, well, isn't that pretty dark and pessimistic? Well, yeah, in a way, but see, it prepares for what we call grace. See, if I can solve my problem through knowledge or economic reform or political revolution, then I don't need a savior, right? But if I've got a problem so fundamental that I can't solve it, then I stand in need of a savior. Okay. I think you see it in all the Coen brothers movies, as you see it in Flannery O'Connor's novels, as you see it in any serious religious person's work of art. So you got that on display.
Yeah, I noticed that straight away, especially with Jerry. It was one of the reasons I didn't like the movie, personally, just because I felt like when I was watching it, this is going to be a disaster, straight away.
And it gets worse and worse, and the more he tries to solve it with wicked means, the worse it gets. Right? He's trying, but he's trying in all the wrong ways. So it's the typical human problem, which is something wrong with my will, right? What's not going to solve it? More will, right? Because the will is what's off kilter. So you keep revving that motor. It's just going to make things worse. Now, so it's just all negativity. No. See, like Flannery O'Connor, I think in all the Coen brothers movies, there's some offer of grace. What's grace? But a pure gift of God that is giving us some kind of opportunity. It's giving us a way out. It's giving us some hope, right? And the grace, I think, in Fargo is embodied in this wonderful character, the police chief, wonderfully played as a woman who's massively pregnant. So she's a life bearer, right? She's a life giver who finds herself now involved in this death-dealing world, this world that's collapsing of its own weight, bodies piling up, etc. But into it comes a law enforcement officer, so someone whose job it is to restore a certain order to things. And she's a life bearer. She's a life giver, right? Now, her name, I think, is important. And the Coen brothers, like a lot of great artists, are sensitive to these symbolic, nuances. What's her name but Marge, right? Well, where does Marge go? But she goes to the margins of human experience. I mean, she goes to the margins of our dysfunction. I love the scenes where she comes upon, remember the police car, and there's the poor officer who's been killed, and then they look down the road, and that's where the other two people were killed. And just like that, she, like Sherlock Holmes, puts it exactly correctly together what happened. And she's unfazed by it. She's not like, oh my God.
Yeah, you're expecting the horror, especially from a small town. You think this might be the only thing she's ever seen like this.
Yeah, but no, I get it. This happened. So she's a life bearer, a law giver who goes to the margin. She goes to the very edges of experience, and she can handle it, Because remember there's a scene where she takes all this in, and then she goes to throw up. And you think, oh, she's so overwhelmed by how gross. She goes, no, little morning sickness. Okay, now. Like, she can handle it. Marge can go to the margins, and she can handle it.
I think that's where that North Dakota accent really fits in, too, because it just makes her seem just so at
wonderful.
Peace, just charming.
Wonderful. Nope, okay. But then, of course, the other thing I play with symbolically, her name is Marge. Her husband, who's played, I can't remember the actor's name. He's a character actor. You've seen a lot of movies. And he's like Mr. Ordinary.
Yeah, sweet guy.
He's a bald-headed guy, a little bit, dumpy. He's not much to look at. He's not like a movie star type. And they're married. And what's his name? Norm. Right. Norm. He's the norm. He's the normal, So Marge goes out to the edges, to the margins of human dysfunction, to be a life bearer. And then she comes back again and again to the norm, And that's how the movie ends. The two of them kind of cozily in bed. The baby, is just going to come in a few weeks. And she says, yeah, we have it pretty good, don't we? I think it's that rhythm of grace. Grace going out to the edges of our experience, but then its purpose is to bring us back to the norm, So she's like a missionary. She's like a life giver.
A movie that you actually said is similar to Fargo is No Country for Old Men. They have similar types of themes. I actually really liked No Country for Old Men. It was one of my favorite films because I felt like in this one, I wasn't sure if it was going to have a happy ending or a bad ending. Yeah. It was kind of unpredictable, but it was almost darker than Fargo.
Oh, yeah, I think it is. And of course, based on a novel, so they themselves didn't write that movie, but it's got a lot in common, as you say, because at the heart of it is another lawman, right? There's Tommy Lee Jones with that wonderful weather-beaten face, playing this old sheriff who has seen it all. Marge, in Fargo is a much younger person, and she's kind of fresh-faced, and she's a pretty canny and experienced law enforcement officer, but she's young. She ends Fargo. Remember with the guy in the back of the car, and she just goes, "I don't understand." That kind of wickedness that you'd kill all these people for a little bit of money. And then she looks up at this dismal gray day, and she goes, "And it's such a beautiful day." I mean, she's got a fair amount of hope, I might say, still in her. Tommy Lee Jones is another lawman who also wades into like remarkable evil.
Right.
So that movie, at the heart of it, is this one of the most wicked characters, I think, in modern cinema. Anton Chigurh is his strange name, And I always think AC, the Antichrist. It was like an Antichrist. It's this fellow who is just a ruthless assassin, a ruthless killer who's serving these drug dealers and so on and so forth. And he always reminds me of Aristotle's delineation in the Nicomachean Ethics of the types of people.
Me too, totally.
Yeah, I know.
That's the first thing I thought of.
Everyone thinks of that.
Exactly.
But the great Aristotle said that you have different types of people. There's the virtuous man. A virtuous man is someone who does the good easily. He's been habituated to virtue. You got the vicious man. That's someone who does the evil easily. He's been kind of habituated to evil. In between, you have the person of moderation, right? He calls him the continent and the incontinent man. That's someone who really struggles, right? But at either end of the scale, Aristotle, so beyond virtue, you have the godlike man. And that's someone we might say like a saint. And it's his little sense of maybe there's a grace even beyond what virtue can accomplish, right? But for our purposes, at the low end, so beyond the vicious, is what he calls the beast-like man. And that's someone who is he's off the scale, literally. He's not just vicious. That's not saying enough. Like, he does evil easily. He's like a beast. He's like off the moral scale. And I think No Country for Old Men is an exploration of that kind of person. And what do you do when you're up against it? So you got a lawman, right? And the law is operating kind of within Aristotle's framework of like, virtue, vice, continence, incontinence, trying to use the law to get people into a more virtuous stance, right? But what do you do, when you're confronted with evil that's off the scale? Someone that can't really be controlled, can't be habituated, can't respond to the promptings of the law. What do you do? And I always read it, Tommy Lee Jones, he's trying, he's trying to get a handle on this ruthlessly terrible situation. But again and again, he signals in the movie, like he's a bit like Marge there at the end of Fargo. I just don't understand this. I just don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, and even worse, he feels like, I can't beat this.
Yeah.
Keep telling me.
Yes, but here's what I want to say about it. This is a biblical thing. See, if Aristotle is right, then all we need is virtue and law and ethics. Right? But if there's something in us that's so off kilter that law is not enough, that habituation and virtue aren't enough, that we need something like grace to deal with it, that opens you to a religious perspective. And that's why, see, as you look at a dark, dark movie like this, and you say, oh boy, what a pessimistic. Well, yeah, but the same way Flannery O'Connor, you look at these terrible sort of stories she tells, but they're always an offer of grace. Sometimes the route to grace can be a keen sense of my own powerlessness in the face of certain types of evil. And now, press it further. Is Anton Chigurh a sort of pure distillate of the beast-like man? Yes. But let's all be honest. We all have something of that in us. You know what I'm driving at?
Yeah.
Now, I can identify, that in me is kind of like, could do better. That's kind of a vicious part of me, but then is there something in me that is really, really off the scale? And yeah, I think we all kind of admit in our more honest moments, which is why I need grace and not just law, not just habituation, not just education and virtue, right?
Right.
And that's why religion remains a permanently important feature of life, both to signal that reality, Lord, lead me, I'm a sinful man,
Yeah.
Is the presence of God opens you to a sense of sin and therefore opens you to grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Mind you, not just, a bad guy, not just someone that really wrestles with it,
Right.
I'm not really up to it all the time. No, that's not it.
Right.
That saved a wretch like me. There's an Anton Chigurh buried somewhere in all of us, So that's how I take even I think that's their darkest movie, but as an invitation to grace.
You're tuned in to the Word on Fire show with Bishop Robert Barron, and we're talking today about the Coen brothers films. Well, let's move on, because I want to make sure we get enough time to talk about this great film, True Grit, which is, I definitely think, one of their best films. It's so well acted and scripted, and it's densely textured, and the symbolism in this movie was possibly the most overt, I think, of all their films. Give us an overview of that movie, just real quick, and what you think of this wildly climactic ending.
Oh, gosh, I love that movie, and of course, the first, when I say adult movie, I don't mean inappropriate. I mean, the first movie that was for adults that I saw when I was a little kid was True Grit with the John Wayne version from 1969. So I was, 9 years old. And my parents took me to that movie. And I loved it, And that's where I discovered I had a little bit of a gift for mimicry, because I used to imitate John Wayne as a little kid, so a 9-year-old voice.
You hear a taste of it now?
No. But my parents would get me up at at parties and say, Bobby, do a little bit of John Wayne.
That's cute to see a kid do that.
Yeah, so anyway, that's the first kind of, adult movie that I saw when I was a kid. So anyway, I've always had an affection for this story. And of course, it's based on a wonderful novel that is filled with biblical themes. The John Wayne version, great movie, but doesn't bring out these biblical themes. Now leave it to the Coen brothers, who do the remake, to make all this very explicit, Their version begins beautifully with this classic sort of evangelical hymn about resting on the everlasting arms. So this image of the arms of God, evocative of God's providence, God's care, and that we need to rest in those arms. That, again, is an invitation to grace, right? I can't solve this problem. I need to surrender my life to God. So arms, right from the beginning, we're aware of. Well, now, the basic plot is this young woman who is about 14 years old, but man, she is like 14 going on 60, she is really smart and she's really motivated. Her father's been brutally killed by a terrible man, and she's filled with a righteous indignation. She's dead right that we need to seek justice, and so she wants to go after this Tom Chaney who killed her father, right? So she secures the services of Rooster Cogburn, who's this grizzled old marshal, right now played by the wonderful Jeff Bridges, who's also in Big Lebowski and other Coen Brothers movies. So she secures his services. They're accompanied also by a Texas Ranger, and they go off looking for this guy, Well, this little girl, again, don't mess with her because she knows what she wants. And her single-minded quest for justice leads eventually, yes, to the capture of Tom Chaney, but it leads to the piling up of corpses and the wreaking of a good deal of havoc, Is this little girl smart, focused? She's on it, but she is monomaniacally preoccupied with justice. She's an embodiment of the divine justice. Well, at the climax of the movie, she has this big pistol and she manages to shoot Tom Chaney. So she takes care of him. But in the very act of shooting him, the kickback, from the pistol pushes her into this cavern where she's injured and she's surrounded by snakes. Okay, realistic in that setting, yes, but also symbolic. Any biblical person thinking of, I've fallen into a dark place where I'm helpless and surrounded by snakes. What are you thinking of? You're thinking of original sin and the problem of sin. So if I could press just on that point, justice is good. Mm-hmm. Attribute of God, absolutely. Worth pursuing, yes. But if justice is not tempered by something like grace and mercy, justice becomes dangerous. And her one-sided mania for justice has caused a lot of havoc, and in the end, injures and wounds her. Well, keep pressing it. She's bitten by a snake, right? And then eventually Rooster returns and rescues her from the pit, carrying her in his two strong arms till they get back to a doctor who's able to save her life, though she loses the arm. And at the end of the movie, we see her now as an adult, and she has the one arm, So I don't know how you can avoid the power of that symbolism. Is Rooster a man of justice? Yeah, sure he is. He's a lawman. Again, another lawman, from Marge to Tommy Lee Jones, now to Rooster Cogburn. I'm forgetting Tommy Lee Jones' character's name. But another lawman, right? Trying to impose some kind of order on things. But what becomes clear in the movie, and I can't go into all the details, that Rooster is a man of justice, yes, but Rooster is also a man of compassion and mercy. The very fact that he returned to get her when he could easily have left.
Right.
He carries her in the two arms, right, which saves her life. She's left at the end of the movie with the one arm, Is it a justice without mercy? The one arm. The arm of justice without the arm of mercy. The movie begins with an exhortation to rest in the everlasting arms of God. Is God a God of justice? Yes, but the movie begins with an evocation of the divine grace. The only thing that's really free in this life is the grace of God. God is both just and merciful, right? I think Rooster's two strong arms that carry her to save her life are evocative of the two arms of God, both justice and mercy. The young girl is left with one side of the religious reality, and that actually does damage. Now, turn it around if you want. I'd be fine with that too. Tell the story the other way.
Right.
If all you got is the arm of mercy without the arm of justice, that will destroy you too. It's the combination of the two that is characteristic of God and characteristic of the great saints here below.
Well, this has been fascinating. I didn't notice a lot of these things in these films, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners gained a lot from it as well. We'll have to do a second episode, I think, with more of the Coen Brothers films.
Yeah, they're so good. I would encourage people just, watch them again. Dig them up on Netflix or something, or buy them. And, they're like any great storyteller. When you look at a great novelist or a great short story writer, be attentive to the subtlety of the symbolic systems being displayed. So they're storytellers, yes, indeed, but they're always using those stories in a symbolically evocative way. And the Coens, I think, are prime examples of that.
And now it's time for our listener question. Remember, if you have a question for Bishop Barron, go to askbishopbarron.com and record your question from any device, and perhaps you'll be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Today's question comes from Laura. As we've been discussing the way God shows his truth in the lives of these characters, Laura wonders how God's providence works in our lives. Let's listen to Laura.
Hello, Bishop Barron. This is Laura from Maryland. And my question for you is about if there's any difference between coincidence and divine intervention, or if those two things are one and the same. Throughout my experience, there have been different times where one event leads to another or two intersect, and the correlation between those two events and the outcome that they produce seem too strong to be just a coincidence. But I'm wondering if you could speak a little about this.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer has to be a subtle one. But I'll say this first off. John Paul II famously said, "For a person of faith, there are no coincidences, but rather only aspects of God's providence that we don't fully understand." So what we call, hey, that was a coincidence, is actually part of God's providential plan that I don't fully grasp. And so it seems like, oh, wow, what a lucky or happy accident that was, when in fact it's part of God's plan. Thomas Aquinas uses the image of a king. Think of the king on the top of the hill, and he sends one messenger on this route and the other messenger on that route. He gives each of them an assignment, but his ultimate purpose is that the two of them meet. See, so the king knows what he's doing. The two messengers meet, and they say, "Hey, what a happy coincidence! What a happy accident!" But in fact, it was the intention of the supreme cause of the king to bring them together. Now, to get more technical, Thomas would say, we can talk about coincidence if we stay simply within the context of the nexus of conditioned causes. But when I invoke the supreme cause, which is not one cause among many, but the cause of causes, then John Paul's insight kicks in. There really are no coincidences, but everything is somehow ingredient in the divine providence. Or think here of the Caussade, who said, everything that happens is a function of the divine will, either the direct divine will or the permissive divine will. Does that make sense? So whatever happens, either God directly wants it or God at least permitted it. And therefore, everything is ingredient somehow in the divine providence. Once you see that, your whole life changes, because you say, again, as John Paul saw, there really aren't coincidences. There are unfoldings of God's providential design in my life. Now, start praying in a different way. Will you look back over your day and say, okay, what was God up to? What's God up to right now as I record these words? Why did that question come through? Maybe there's someone listening right now who needs that answer, And you say, oh, what a happy coincidence. Boy, Bishop Barron's talking about providence. Well, maybe it's not a happy coincidence, but part of the king's overall design. That is a very quick and inadequate answer to a very complicated question.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Word on Fire show. Be sure to check out our website, wordonfireshow.com, for both the trailers to these films and Bishop Barron's YouTube commentaries on them. If you haven't already, can I ask you a favor? If you're enjoying the show, please go to iTunes Podcast. If you have an iPhone like me, it's that purple app icon with a radio signal on it. Go on there and go to the Word on Fire Show podcast and leave us a review. The more reviews we get, the more people we can reach and draw into the spiritual life. Thanks in advance, and God bless, and we'll see you back here next week for the Word on Fire Show.